and it's gorgeous. It is gorgeous, whatever it is. Well, look, we don't have Paul just yet, Ashley, so let's just head straight then into the papers. Let's start with The Observer, because this is an interesting one. A cabinet split over NHS pay piles pressure on Sunak. The strikes from public service bodies have been going on for some time now. No sign of abating, and yet the government maintains its position. What's your take on this?
I think it's really a shame because the government has had many opportunities to try to reverse the situation of the NHS for many years, particularly when it reached a crisis point, obviously during the pandemic. It had moved toward the sort of just-in-time production methods that meant that while you reduced stockpiles and you reduced unnecessary staffing and so on, when you really need those things, they were not available. And so it seemed obvious, therefore, that there would need to be a change of pace, and to a certain extent there was. But in 2020, 2021, there was a brief rise in the cap of training for doctors and nurses, and then it was reinstated. So the pressure on the existing doctors and nurses just gets worse and worse. People suffer burnout. They're underpaid. They work long shifts. You know, there's stories in the papers today about doctors and nurses who, after working 12-hour shifts, come home and can't afford to pay their bills. And this is a situation that simply cannot carry on much longer. And yet the government has been dragging its feet for years in terms of actually being able to deal with this in an effective way. And I suppose one wonders whether or not they remain wedded to this kind of just-in-time production where they prefer to hire agency staff than actually train doctors and nurses to be full-time on the NHS. And I think actually that's where most people wouldn't mind their tax money going to, actually having doctors and nurses who have a decent wage, as opposed to spending enormous amounts on agency staff and having a system that, and it's not the only problem, but having a system that doesn't work and isn't there for you when you need it.
And as if by magic, Paul appears. Paul, it's good to have you here with us. I'm keen to get your views on the strikes and the current position and the splits within the cabinet.
Yes, I think this is interesting because the line that we have had for the last number of weeks has been very firmly that there's going to be no movement, that particularly Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, has said that he's going to stick firmly to the pay review model and the 2% or around 3% pay rise. But now, according to Sarah Gordon, who's head of Unison, last Monday when they met, she noticed a change in tone from Barclay, and Barclay was calling on her to help change the mind of Hunt and Sunak, which is a remarkable position to take when you think about it, that there's the most senior health minister in Britain is asking unions to help him get them more money. But as she said, he sees that this is a better way to work, and also it's a way to prevent potential extra strikes and deeper strikes in February. We haven't seen this before. It's potentially, it's not potentially, it is a problem for Sunak, and it will be a test to see how he can cope with this and keep his cabinet together.
Let me come to you with this next one here, Ashley, because we're still sticking with the theme of the NHS and, of course, strikes, but some strong words coming in from the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. The Sunday Telegraph there, he says, I will slash nonsense bureaucracy in the NHS. And also he goes on to say that it has to either reform or die. Just elaborate on this for us.
Yes, so Starmer was writing in the Telegraph and saying that the NHS should not be off limits to criticism, which I would tend to agree with. He says that it's, it shouldn't be sort of a hallowed institution that is beyond any kind of reform. But we have to be very careful, obviously, in the kinds of reforms that we bring about. They need to be very well thought out. And one of the suggestions that Starmer's put forward is things like patients self-referring for things like physio. And I think, in the grand scheme of the difficulties facing the NHS, this is kind of small potatoes. And in fact, one of the things that Starmer says is that we need to not look to doctors as the front line, that we need to look to other things. And as I said before, I think this is a little bit maybe even a little bit dangerous because, or at least unpopular, because I think, as I said, most people would like their tax money to go to doctors and nurses. And he's sort of hitting on this idea that there's too much bureaucracy in the NHS, which is absolutely right. But the answer to that isn't to deflect attention away from the fact that there's too much bureaucracy and too little spending on the people who actually deliver our health care. And so we need to think also about training doctors and nurses. Now, I know that this is a difficult problem because in order to train doctors and nurses, you need to have the capacity within existing hospitals to actually, it's not just happening in universities, and the universities, of course, need to be able to train them. But there needs to be some thinking about that. And instead, we get a lot of talk about customers and patients as sort of customers and this thinking on this side of things instead of thinking about the supply side. And that seems to me to be a complete misdirection.
And Paul, this next story in the Sunday Mirror will stop anyone in their tracks. In fact, this is a kind of story that gets people's blood boiling. So the headline alone, Tory donor tycoons, 4.5 million to destroy PPE. Just shed some more light on this money that's flowing about.
Yeah, sloshing about. This is a remarkable story, and given the pressures on the NHS, you're right, this will make people furious. It's relating to Steve Parkin and his company Clipper Logistics. We'll have seen their lorries up and down the motorways. And the Sunday Mirror claims that he has been given 4.5 million to destroy PPE that he had previously supplied, having had another 11 million to supply it. So that's 15.5 million for PPE that is of limited use and limited value, it said. So he bought gowns, goggles and surgical masks that were not fit for purpose, and now he's been given this money to destroy it. And this, there's no allegation of illegality here, and the Mirror came to stress this, but what it does is it feeds into a narrative that there's this grubby series of deals going on where the Tory government and people who know them, in order to get this money, 3.5 billion, the Mirror says, went to people who were close to the Tory party and donors. And if a lot of them are in this situation where the PPE was of no use and has now been destroyed and that money's gone out again, it just keeps this idea going that if you know the right people and you give some money, because Parkin had said give £730,000 to the Tories since 2017, if you give enough money, you will get a big load back again. And with all the issues, as we've been discussing, with the potential cabinet split, with nurses' strike getting longer and deeper in February if it does happen, with all the other strikes going on, this just looks like people looking after themselves rather than the greater good.
Absolutely. And another story that's definitely constantly dominating the headlines, obviously the story to do with Prince Harry and the royal family. We are running out of time, unfortunately, but Ashley, in 20 seconds, if you can, it looks as though there could be some peace talks ahead of the coronation. Well, 15 seconds now.
Yes, so the Sunday Times is reporting that there's some hope of reconciliation. Harry obviously was talking about reconciliation quite a lot in interviews surrounding the book, which is a bit surprising because it seems that he's not really courting that, but rather the sympathy of an American audience.
Ashley, that was beautifully done. Thank you so much. Ashley and Paul, we'll see you in an hour. We'll see you after the break.